Today I'm putting a roll cage, more of a harness bar, into this truck for a customer, and we're going to talk about a few details of what I do if I was leaning more towards like a safety racing style cage versus more what we're going to be doing today, which is more of a for looks and somewhere to hook up harnesses and put bucket seats in kind of a setup. Step number one is always getting everything out of the way. So as you can see, the customer already had the interior and everything stripped out of this truck. It's about as bare bones as it can get right now, so it's a great place to start. Also included a big hefty chunk of material here, and this we're going to end up using for outriggers off of the frame, just because the frame on these trucks is way in here, and if we tried to drop all the bars in right there, it'd be almost center of the back of the seat. It's not going to do us any good for a harness bar. So we're going to do outriggers, plus we're going to want to get that tube out farther anyway. Here's a shot underneath just to show how much room we've got from the outside of the body into the frame. That's why we got to do an outrigger setup. A lot of newer chassis, the frame gets moved out quite a bit and then you can land right on the frame. But with that big heavy tubing we got there, it'll be plenty strong. The next concerns are, where are we going to drop the tubes through? The way this cab is shaped, everything's curved. And really anything where we end up out past this part of the floor is going to end up where it's out past this part of the body, where if we tried to drop it straight down it would be visible. The next concern is, where do we end up on the roof? Because same thing, everything is a big curved surface, just like the outside of the truck profile here. So depending on where we put the tubes, it's going to make a pretty big difference about where everything ends up. After looking at this for a while, I came up with two different viable options as far as ways and locations to put this cage in. But based on the customer needs, we're going to have a much easier time than we would if I was worried about making this like as safe as possible for being a race truck. The biggest difference is just where the tube ends up. So if I wanted to maximize safety, I'd want to put the tubes as far out close to the body as possible to the sides, just for anything like if it spun and went sideways into a wall or got T-boned by another vehicle. And where that comes in is down here on the floor. We got this brace that holds the seat up from the factory. I would have been all the way out to that edge of the floor where I could actually put a seam weld into the floor for a little extra strength there. We'd have to build our outrigger off of the frame, but that would come straight up. I could put a small bend in it. It'd angle with this section of the body, and then with a 6-inch radius it comes out very close, and we could tuck it up pretty tight to this roof and run it all the way across and back down. That's the little bit more difficult setup as far as building main tube, because we've got a couple of multiple bends and we're passing through the floor. We'd have to cut out a larger chunk of the floor because we'd still have to be able to move it around for the tubes that would come in through the roof. The most difficult part about that setup is we are heavily into the curve of the sheet metal on the outside of the truck. We'd probably have to cut out a big patch on the outside and a patch on the inside to be able to get our tubes in and measure everything, get straight, and then we'd have to patch that stuff back together, which adds a lot of time and fabrication work, especially making the bodywork look nice on the outside if that's a concern. Based on the seats the customer is trying to run and where they're going to end up, the harness bar needs to be at the bottom of the rear window here, and because of that it's on top of this sheet metal. The outside sheet metal actually comes in at the window, so even if I cut all of this interior sheet metal out to tuck the bar back as far as possible, I'm not gaining a lot. I mean, there might be 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch that could be gained there, but at the same time it's a lot more effort. It's cutting up the sheet metal, so the interior is not gonna fit like it should, kind of a thing, and it becomes more work again. But for a race application, that would give me maximum envelope, if you will, or maximum space inside of the cage tubes for changing seating positions and just making sure there's some crush zone in the event of an impact. Because that's not what this truck is going to do, we're going to be going with a much simpler setup where I'm going to, instead of the tubes being all the way out, they're going to come in and sit at kind of about the midway point of this floor curve back here. So they're going to end up coming up about here, a couple inches from the edge of the quarter windows. And what that's going to do is allow us to go straight up, do a single 90 bend across, single 90 bend, and back down. It gets us away from this floor brace so we can notch out the floor to be able to slide it forward for welding on top when the down tubes go on. And we have to give up about 2 inches of height in order to make that happen, but that 2 inches of height puts that tube in a spot where we can drill through a lot flatter part of the curve on the back of the roof. And that all means that hopefully my goal today is be able to get everything lined up and drill a small hole to the size of the tube, ideally, or just a little bit bigger where we can figure out a gasket sort of situation, or it's just minor sheet metal work to fix it on the outside and seal it up. Ideally, I'd really want to try to just drill to the size of the tube, and because this is just more of a harness bar setup and it's not meant to be a roll cage of any sort, our harness bar becomes a nice straight bar, super easy, 2 notches on the sides, put it at the height, I can weld it in, and then instead of following race regulations where we can't have any bends in the downrigger tube, I'll be able to put a couple bends in it. And since it's mostly for looks at that point, if I could put a little bit of a bend and go straight into the cab, it should make having that 2 size hole work out really well. And if I can pass through the cab with a straight line, get the tubes lined up, and then having the notches in the floor, I should be able to slide the whole works forward far enough. I can do 100% welding all around the top and then slide it back into position and then patch the floors up and the outriggers to finish it off. Alright, let's talk about error on old vehicles. So I got a laser up there in the dash. I can put my angle gauge on here and it's 0, and I can put it on the roof and it's 0. The window is a ½ degree off, but the big thing is you can see where the laser line's on, and I got it lined up with what sounds like center line down there as far as measuring across the cab, and that's a good 3/8 ½ inch off at the roof. So I'm gonna have to decide what I want to actually be my center line in this truck. I almost feel like I need to go off the roof because that's what I went first, and the floor can kind of be whatever, but I'm going to take a few more measurements and make sure, because we're not actually going to be super tight to the roof side to side, so maybe that's where I can let there be wiggle room and then line it up on the floor instead. But I'm going to decide, and then pretty much I'm going to have to use the laser for everything, because if I measure something off the roof and something off the floor, everything's going to end up crooked. Alright, now I made a bracket for the laser. Well, it's a lot more accurate than just sitting on the dash. And you can see now it's inside of its self-leveling range where it's actually leveling properly. It's just sitting on the dash, it had a little wear, but still. Oh, there's the inaccuracies of manufacturing from 70 years ago now. Not bad, really. So Just going to take an average of that, do everything for centering off of the laser, unless something with the body is super offset and weird where I got to do something different. I mean, really, this is just me getting over accurate. I mean, we're 3/8 of an inch off on the body itself. So, I mean, anything I do that's any more accurate than that's going to be better, but I want to try to be as accurate as I can, so we're going to use laser. I use a tape measure to line up with my laser mark, and I marked the inside of where the tube's going to land and the outside of where the tube's going to land. Oh, I might start out here with just drilling the hole where I actually want it to be positioned. That way it holds it positively in place while I figure out the rest of it. But I will be ending up notching this out so that we're able to slide that whole main hoop forward in order to do the complete welding on top later. Okay, things don't always go to plan. So, this is where I wanted it, height-wise, in the truck. You can see we're not all the way up to the roof, but we're down where it'll be nice and easy to go through the outside of the cab, because it'll be right here. So, for the bottom, what I wanted to do was pass the tube through the holes and then be able to weld straight on to the outriggers below. Because of the size of the door opening, I gotta update that plan to it will install flush with the floor. Actually, probably put 3/16 or 1/4 inch plate on the floor here that will weld to the tube, and there'll also be one on the bottom side. And really, I don't even have to go that thick. I mean, that's way overkill. I think minimum plate thickness that a lot of race organizations call out, if we were building it for that, only need it to be like 100th or 1/8 inch at the most. But I've got some 3/16 plate laying around, so that's probably what I'll cut, because I got a big sheet of it and I can make it to the shape of this section of floor. And then down here, instead of that pipe passing through and being able to weld it right to the outrigger, I'll have to put the outrigger in a way that it gets up and I can have a plate right there on the bottom of where that tube's trying to pass through. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, I'll make it work. Is I can run that up, have that plate mounted there, weld all this stuff down here, cut out a larger section of floor, and I could even weld this right to that plate on the outrigger, and that eliminates the two plates. Or if you were trying to do something that was bolt-in, you could do the two plates with bolts. I'm not worried about this thing coming back out, neither is customer, so we're just gonna weld it right on. So I'll probably just end up cutting out a larger section of floor. So this is the first outrigger roughed in. And I mean rough, but it'll sit up in there pretty decent. Still have some, final fitting I can do to tighten the gaps up nice. But I need to be able to have access, because this whole edge is going to be top to bottom on the frame. So I need access to the top, which is going to require cutting out this area. What my plan is, I'm going to slit along this edge, and then body saw along that side, so I can just tip this up. That way I'll have access back there to weld it, because I'll need to put the support plate welded to the outrigger first, which is probably going to be about that size. So it'll just be a plate on top. So it'll kind of sit like that, sit up like this in the chassis. So there'll be a plate on top of there. This end needs to be boxed in. All that'll have to be welded before this gets welded to the frame, which means it'll end up sitting in there like that. I'll have a little bit of gap here to be able to weld, and then I can fold the floor back down and weld the floor all the way around. And I'll have probably about, this is the hole I drilled originally. It had a little bit of a tilt angle forward at the top, so this arc here is where the tube actually needs to go to be 90 degrees. It's not too big a deal. It was only like 1.5 degrees difference from there being tucked all the way back, but I'd rather have it be straight 90 because then it's, you know, just off of this all the way up to the roof. First outrigger is in. As you can see, I had access to get in there and weld on it. The split frame was a little goofy because whatever this wasn't attached all that well, so it's peeling up on the edges. So not my prettiest welds, but plenty good. I had maybe some bigger gaps than I really wanted, but I was able to make sure that I got plenty of heat in there and get that big material melted properly, because this isn't the biggest welder, but if you use it right, it can do pretty well. Alright, I've been cruising along on this, trying to work a little bit on the truck after work each day, and kind of in between some rain and getting dark here. But as you can see, I got the rear tubes bent, so we're going to go over that just a little bit. As with any project, sometimes you screw up. So that one ended up being a test piece, but they got it overbent a little too much on this side so that I wasn't at the angle I wanted to be. But it was good because I was able to know that that center to center on the bend distance was going to work out. So I got a piece that I bent, but I might be able to cut the straight section out of the middle and use that for part of the X later too. So with the down tubes in the back, I had to work out where I was going to land on the frame. I was originally thinking around here, just because it's a nice strong piece. However, customer didn't care if I was boxing in or modifying anywhere else, and it just, I don't know, my brain told me to kind of line it up with where this fender well was going to be, because that would look a lot nicer, and I have the bends in it. If this was a racing application, that would be a no-no. But the bends are in it so that it can pass straight through the cab and straight through the wood floor. It should give it a really clean look, which is what I'm going for. And I need the extra straight section up there so that I can slide the main hoop forward to weld around up at the top, which I'll show you here. So these ends of the down bars are coped. They don't quite line up yet, and that was a little bit on purpose. I started with the main tube just a little bit high because I could always trim the bottom to drop that down and center it up, which is the plan. But I still got some room up to the roof here, and I got this 3 inches down here on the floor. I can slide the whole works forward, which hopefully will give me enough room to get up here at a little bit of an angle with the MIG gun on both sides and get that welded. And if I can't quite reach it with the MIG gun, it should have plenty of room up there to get the TIG in. This is the biggest reason for putting the straight section in, since this is not, again, not a race application. Is this will be a very easy TIG weld all the way around the cab on here. Or heck, I could probably even MIG weld, just do a little spot at a time, make sure not put too much heat in it and make it look nice. And even if the customer doesn't want to weld right at that, even just shoot some silicone or something and be able to seal up the cab again, which should work out very nicely. Well, that screw-up bar was going to be too short for doing one of the diagonals. However, it was just long enough for the harness bar here. I got just a little bit of curve left on each side, which is okay because I was pulling the bottoms forward towards the front of the truck, and it was making a little bit more gap here because I was trying to achieve 90 degrees straight up and down with the tubes. So with this little bit of bend to the back, it's actually going to tuck it right tight to the cab again. So I was already thinking about doing that anyway, and then when this oops bar ended up being pretty close, I'm like, well, whatever, give it a shot. So happened to work out pretty good. You can see here with the cuts, that's just using the Rogue Fab Versa Notcher. I'll end up grinding this back on the cope just to make a nice even weld around the edges. But yeah, came out pretty consistent. It's got just a little bit of tension to hang in there all on its own. So at most I expect it might be spreading the bottom by an 1/8 inch at the most. I'm really not too worried about that, but I can always, by the time I cope this out a little bit, as you can see there's a little bit of gap right here, that'll probably settle and it'll be pretty close to just being perfect. At this point I'm doing the rear tubes for the diagonals. I needed to have these in a stable position before I could really fit these with any kind of accuracy. So what I did was I started with the main hoop inside. I got that into position and I got the harness bar up into its position on the main hoop, tacked those two together, and then I got the main hoop to fit nice into the cope on the down tube bars, which are leaving me just a ever so slight of a little gap to fill with weld down at the base plates. So those are tacked up here. They're not tacked to the base plates yet, but they're in position. Then with the down tubes here, I made sure I kept my spacing even, top all the way down to the frame. There's just a single tack on each side to hold those in position, and then I was able to start fitting the angle tubes. So the first main cross is tacked in. Normally, if you were doing this for a racing application again, you would prioritize over the driver. I was going to flip this one, but it fit better on this side. I mean, just ever so slight little differences in the way the bends, and I'm actually like up on the very beginning of the bends on both sides because I'm trying to maximize the strength by reinforcing the bend a little bit. But I wanted to keep it pretty close to being in the same plane. So that's why this one's angled this way. So it's tacked in, got my first second tube section, or first section of the second tube tacked in. And I'm aligning that using a string that's just duct taped to the tube to try to match the first tube as best I can as far as position on the down bars. These welds on top are by far the hardest ones to get. That's why I had this shifted forward the 3 inches that I could, try to get access up there. When it comes to roll cages, having a good weld with good penetration is far more important than looking pretty
And especially in tight areas like this, it's almost impossible to really get in there and get a proper angle on stuff. So it's just a matter of making sure that it's got a solid weld, and nobody's going to end up seeing what it looks like anyway because it's tucked up in a way. The harness bar is a lot easier to get to, especially with it moved forward from the cab. After I finished welding those, I knocked it back into place and did the rear. Once I had the cage pushed back into place and the rear was about where I wanted it, I was able to line my tack marks back up from before that I just broke loose to slide it forward and get it into position. After tacking in the crossbars and stuff, I ended up with a little bit extra of a spread on the bottom, and I decided I was going to fully weld the X before I welded it down to the chassis because that would shrink and pull that in a little bit. So that's what I did. Just started up at the top, got halfway around everything I could from the top, and then quickly laid down and got everything from the bottom. You know, same thing here. It's about good penetration. Like, they got a nice long weld bead up here. It ain't stacking dimes like it would if we TIG'd it, but TIG welding, it basically takes 3 times longer right off the bat. So it's not what we're going for with this truck. I mean, the rest of the truck's all beat up anyway, as the customer put. Like, it doesn't have to be super fancy. This isn't going to win any shows anyway, so just want to have a good weld so that it can be adding safety and stiffness to this chassis. These base welds on the down bar are by far the easiest ones to do, especially because we switched and had it to a 90-degree drop in on there. It made those real nice and easy, lots of space around them. It was able to make very nice welds there. Inside the cab's a little messier because we had the outriggers, and I had to put a little bit of a shim in here, so I welded the shim down, and I'm welded to the shim. It's all solid steel top to bottom now, and we had to patch this floor up. It may not be the prettiest thing, but I'd rather it be sealed up where we're not having water or critters or whatever else climb through under here, especially if the customer decides to put a nice interior in this. So I was able to patch and weld everything back up. I designed these outriggers to be the size of that hole that I cut, so that made that fairly easy. And then that opening I had here to get that weld on top of the frame, I just folded that back down and welded the seams back up. I get some primer sprayed on this just so that it doesn't flash rust right away. Make primer stick nice. I'm going to end up sanding all of my weld joints just to clean up anything there. Some of these you may notice on camera are shiny because I just wire brushed over them with the angle grinder. But otherwise, just going to kind of scuff everything up and wipe it down with acetone so that the primer sticks real nice, and then the customer can make it whatever color he wants.